Hello, everybody. Today is Saturday, March 30th. It's the day after Good Friday. And my topic for the video today is going to be the upcoming total solar eclipse in Aries. And I've got a lot of stuff going on with my mind of what I'm thinking of with the current transits. Not only the eclipse, but the fact that we're having this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming up as well, and we've got a packed stellium in Pisces right now, and I've got a fairly strong Sag Pisces kind of thing going on my chart, so I'm getting hit by this. The Pisces stellium, anyways. I also realized that when it comes to astrology, making astrology videos, that people tend to pay a lot of it. Like, when you make a video that's just about the eclipses, it could be a chance that I get more views than normal. And I was thinking about some of the other videos, like the videos that I've been making recently. I'm a bit in this whole thing I'm doing about making astrology videos. I have to admit that I'm kind of like going a little bit off the beaten path of what other astrologers are doing, and maybe that even goes with this eclipse though, because there's something to do with individuality, like setting off on your own, that kind of thing. Not having to be like everybody else. This kind of a strong individual thing about Aries, or the fact that there is going to be a Mercury retrograde, and we've also got Chiron in Aries, like with the wounded healer archetype. I've made a bunch of videos already about this kind of dynamic, and for those of you who are new to the channel, who don't know my story, I have been recovering from some health problems, and when I was younger, I had some mental health concerns, and and one of the things is that I kind of believe there's a sort of, I'm not like totally on board with this sort of new thought thing, but I do believe to some extent there's this idea where if you repeat a lie often enough, it becomes the truth, right? And there's this kind of thing about having like a problem, or like if I don't want to dwell on a certain problem so much and repeat that and build up this identity, this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that's my identity. But at the same time, I think there's like being in denial doesn't really help either. Maybe I'm going a bit all over the place with this, but one of the things I wanted to talk about was that there's this whole thing about like being sensitive, being open, being porous, that I talked about in my last video about the Neptune influence and what's going on, being sensitive to what's going on in the environment, and that a lot of astrologers will give you this kind of advice that's like not to get caught up in like the drama of current events, and not to get into basically emotional reaction about what's going on, but rather to help to feed establish a sense of being grounded in a sense of well-being, and then that supports everybody, right? And I think there's actually some great wisdom to this, but at the same time, there are certain things that, I was looking at, some of the things that I've been bringing up in my last videos is that I just have been driving straight into things like the recent terrorist attack in Russia, and the, all sorts of stuff that may be kind of like questionable in terms of that approach. Like, we're not going to focus on the bad news items, and we're not going to try to I'm going to say that there's a certain idea that I have for this video, that I'm going to include a news item that's kind of not very nice. So just a heads up about that. I'm not doing this thing where it's going to be just totally sanitized and not looking at the darker aspects of things, right? Um, and you know what I'm talking about is basically like part of the reason. Like, I mean, in my last video, I mentioned that that I will. The fact of the matter is that I have a bit of a disability, that I have a couple of different health problems, but when I was younger, I got hospitalized for a psychotic episode, and there's something built into the diagnosis of psychosis, and there's like all, whether that's bipolar or schizophrenia or schizoaffective or whatever, right? It's something that is stigma around it, and the stigma around it is associated with people being violent or people being hard to deal with, and so for this reason, I don't want to build up an identity of being that person. But this is the whole thing, is that it becomes this thing that like that's like nobody wants to be a disabled person who doesn't have their own autonomy, who doesn't have their own, who's dependent on a system or something. People want to be strong individuals. They want to heal, and they associate healing with basically becoming the productive member of society, the strong individual, and all this kind of stuff. But like, I'm just going to give you this example, and this is the other thing about like, what I know, like, you can take this advice, like, you're not going to pay attention to the news, you're not going to doom scroll and stuff like that. But to be perfectly honest, like, I live with my mom and my sister, and like sometimes it'll be like in the evening, and I'll like walk past where my mom watches TV, and it's just out of coincidence that I walk past and she's watching the evening news, and the evening news is like, have you ever? I always think about this scene from this David Lynch movie, Wild at Heart, where Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern are driving, and the radio they're flicking the channels on the radio, and they're just saying the most terrible things. And like, that's what the thing is, like, I can totally sympathize that, like, if you're sensitive, you may not want to listen to all those completely terrible things, right? But the thing is, like, one of my struggles is, like, if I don't have control over my environment, I might just be walking past the TV and having that, like, I have no control. It's just on the radio, it's on the TV, it's on this media that's constantly blasting at you regardless, right? And that could have to do with boundary issues with my mom. Maybe. Well, I mean, it's just, or just coincidence, or, like, my mom will also, I don't go on social media, but my mom will say, hey, like, I was on, our local Facebook community groups, and here's the hot gossip, that here's what the trolls online are saying, here's what all the big drama and all the it's like, you can be avoiding this, and this person will have no appreciation for the fact that you're trying to, there's this kind of thing, like, how much control do we really have to avoid this anyways? And I think there's other sort of things that go in this too, is that if you're able to completely isolate yourself from all the bad things going on and live inside a bubble that supports your well-being, like, that's good, but it could just mean that you're, like, extremely privileged, and that there all could be, that you're like the people who stow away in some sort of bunker while the whole world goes to crap around them, right? There's something about the New Age culture, which, like, if you've ever seen the movie Zardoz, it kind of goes with this. Like, you have this, we're going to be an extremely developed, psychically in tuned, sensitive, cultured society, but like the people who are that are supporting us through their livelihood of, like, where we're getting our food from, are governed by this total, like, barbaric warfare, and but we're going to stay tuned with love and light and not pay attention to the suffering going on around us while we profit off of it and live this sort of in the lap of luxury, right? And so there's things like that I'm kind of like, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, right? But what I wanted to say, though, is that there's this whole thing about the wounded healer healing, and there's this idea. I've been thinking in terms of, like, idealism versus materialism, that whole conversation. And I actually, I tend to like have this split where I'm going more in a direction where, if you can't tell, me being an astrologer, I kind of like idealism, and there's something about the way the archetypes of astrology work that sort of lend themselves toward an idealistic way of looking at things. But you could have this question of like, what comes first, the ideal, and then existence is an emanation from the ideal, or is it that the existence comes first, and then we still have ideals, we still have imagination, we still have archetypes, but those archetypes don't precede the existence. That the archetypes may either come out of existence, or the archetypes may be completely immanent within existence. And I kind of have this idea that like this could just be perspectives you take, that you could still even just do astrology and be an existentialist and say that the astrology that we're doing the archetypes don't precede the existence at all, right? And that but there's something about the immanence of being in a cosmos with these planets, in being in a universe that has some kind of this symbolic resonance, this archetypal charge or whatever. But the problem is, what I'm trying to get at here is that I think there's an issue around the whole thing about healing with archetypes and healing with these kinds of ideals, that there's a kind of, like, I'm at the point of making this video, I'm under the impression that it may be a kind of a trap or kind of like a pitfall to think that the reason why, like, if you have an illness or if you're sick, it's because you are out of harmony or out of alignment with what is, and that in order to heal, like, if you like get right with Jesus, right, and if you put yourself in alignment to this higher ideal, then that's going to be your ticket to healing yourself and living in proper harmony with the world. And there's something about this, the astrology around this actually I think goes really well with this, is that there is a part of the influence here is that during the actual eclipse, which will happen on April the 8th, it's happening in the sign of Aries, which is ruled by Mars, and Mars will be in Pisces in a conjunction to Saturn. Okay? And Saturn is also there with Neptune in Pisces, and there's something about the whole dynamic, because this is all happening in Aries, is that eventually what's going to happen, we're a few years off from this, but Saturn and Neptune are going to make a conjunction and ingress into Aries. And so there's something about these eclipses which I feel like sort of are preceding what's going to happen with the Saturn-Neptune conjunction that's going to move into Aries in a few years. But there's something about this whole materialism, idealism dynamic which goes with, like it or not, the whole thing about communism and Marxism, because, and there's some sort of like there's some sort of irony here, because the Marxists would tend to, typically people who go with a materialist ideology would reject astrology based on its idealism. But the Communist Manifesto was written under a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. So if you were a communist, or I don't even, let's not get hung up on communism, but so the point I want to point out though is that the communism and Marxism were kind of like, came out of a disillusionment, right? A disillusionment with a certain way of things going, and saying like, we can make something better than that. And of course they didn't do very well. Communism did not turn out very well, obviously. I don't have to, I'm not here to try to make that point. But there's a certain thing of like being disillusioned with the ideal and coming up with some sort of new theory that goes with the Saturn-Neptune kind of disillusionment, being disillusioned with the ideal, right? And now I'm gonna give an example. Like, there's something about what I'm doing here, which is being true to my own life, being true to my life experience, and there's a the question is, of all the things that I could be doing, why am I making astrology videos? And like, I used to be involved in this community. Like when I was going through my psychosis, I saw there's an inherently um, spiritual thing going on, and I got really involved in this sort of scene called the spiritual emergency, the scene that had to do Stan Grof, who's an associate of Richard Tarnas, came up with this idea of spiritual emergence. But there's this thing of like, what tends to happen is that there tends to be this sort of like differentiation between like, they don't, I don't know, maybe it's too much to get bogged. Well, I mean, people might be interested. There's this thing, it tends to, the same thing always comes up of like wanting to make spiritual emergency something that is inherently separate from the mental health diagnoses of schizophrenia and bipolar and all this kind of stuff. And then there's other people who see that there may be some underlying thing. Well, I don't know. I have to say that after dealing with seeing it in other people, I've been a bit disillusioned by spiritual emergency, and I'm honestly think it's a little bit more realistic to just say that, a lot of people may want to reject these labels because there's a negative association around them, there's a stigma around them, and by affirming the more positive stuff that goes with spirituality, that might gives people a better sense of self-esteem, a better sense of, like a more, but I'm just going to like, there's something, I'm going to show you guys one thing, is that I haven't been reading this that much, but there's this guy, I got into this from reading, Freud wrote about this guy, Deleuze and Guattari wrote about this guy, there's this guy Daniel Paul Schreber, who this is the guy's memoir of his own mental illness, and this guy himself talks all sorts of things about like being in contact with God and angels and mystical visions, and he is used as one of the classic examples in the psychoanalysis of like, this is what psychosis is like, this is what schizophrenia is like, and like if you actually look at but there's obviously going to be a difference between people who have psychosis and people might have different sorts of visionary experience, but they're not psychotic. But the thing is, there's always seems to be some spiritual component with people who have mental illness, right? But the thing, like, I'm just going to go right into it. This thing, then I'm like, if you're squeamish, you may want to like skip past this part or stop listening, but like I was saying, this thing about walking past my mom's TV that's on and having all this terrible news stories. And, what I realized was that, there's this sort of, people say like, don't pay so much attention to it. But if you don't pay attention to it and you just get this phenomenon of a bunch of noise coming out of the TV, it gives you the impression that like all this bad stuff is happening at once. But if you actually look more closely at the news stories, then you see that there's like, this particular example wasn't current. It was an event that happened about 2 years ago that is just in the news today because the guy is going through a trial, right? And this is the reason why people don't want to have the label of being a schizophrenic or a psycho or whatever, like Alfred Hitchcock or whatever. It was a guy on Vancouver Island, right? What he did was that he crashed his car, got out of the car, went to a coffee shop, proceeded to brutally murder somebody, and then once he was arrested, he was going on about how he was some special person who was helping Elon Musk and all this, and like, not only this was that I feel really sad is that the guy was a father, right? The guy had kids, right? And I'm just mentioning this because, first of all, one of the me being a guy who has dealt with my own challenges around mental illness and stuff like that, and looking around at what's going on in the world, like to have a, I think rather than setting myself all these big goals, like I have to, like in order to heal myself, I have to put myself right with this image that I'm going to be a father, I'm going to be fully functional, I'm going to drive because I don't drive, right? I don't drive, I don't have kids, and I've been focusing more on recovering from my health and trying to build a career, right? But I just ran into this frustration with when I was involved in the spiritual emergency community, is that there's a lot of people, and like this whole thing about like neurodiversity, right? There's a whole group of people out there who are like, if you get away from just like being schizo and talk about just neurodiversity of having your brain is a bit different, but it doesn't have to be a pathology. There's this thing around it which really is actually, I think, a kind of mania. That is like, not only is my brain not disordered and broken, but I'm actually gifted, and that this gift could enable me to have these great ideas and become successful, and to make myself like Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk and all this kind of stuff. And like there's this and it's not like this is actually kind of a mania, like a delusion of grandeur, right? But you don't want to disempower people by telling them, if somebody can, help find some creative idea to make a living for themselves by thinking outside of the box, sure, that's great. But what we see is what tends to happen is you have this whole kind of like rush of people who want to like get one up on life, who want to be like, I'm not going to just submit to my illness and leave a second-rate life. I'm going to do it all. I'm going to be, a go-getter. I'm going to be a good parent, and I'm going to be the next Elon Musk. In the psych ward, before all this stuff, you'd meet people in the psych ward who are going on about Steve Jobs and stuff like that, who are like, I'm going to become like some huge like mastermind, like you're like, I'm the master CEO, the genius with the plan. And this is what I'm trying to say is that I think this goes with the sun as like the solar hero, the leader, and being in an eclipse where it's like the eclipse is kind of like you suddenly have this sort of moment of revelation where you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe that whole strong father figure, brilliant mastermind genius is actually like, that is actually what's kind of making you crazy, right? Because it's like you might have a better impact on the world around you if instead of trying to put yourself under all this pressure to like be the strong male ego that you're super like that you've got this sort of like I was also listening to this a little bit of an audio book that there's this book called No Bad Parts, which Adam Ellenboss was recommending, and in it they talk about how you can have people have like the drill sergeant super ego, or this sort of like voice that dictates to you how you really ought to be living your life, what the morally decent thing to do, what it means to be a good person. And like I think with this, what I'm getting coming up around the solar eclipse is that we think that if we put ourselves get right with this thing, then that's going to be the thing that heals us. But it could very well be that this is the thing that's driving us crazy, right? And that it's like and one of the things that I really like about, I brought up in one of my earlier videos this thing about Sun Ra, is that Sun Ra was talking about this thing like the path of the wicked and the path of the righteous, right? But the thing is, he's like, I don't know if I don't want to confuse you people here, but he is saying that, the path of the righteous is all about doing righteous things in the world, right? If you're on the path of the righteous, it's up to you to do good deeds to make things good, right? but that is kind of, you're going on this principle that the world is not good already and it's up to you to do all these heroic good things to make it good. Whereas on the other hand, the path of the wicked is to instead be more like shadow work, where you realize that there may be in things about you which are not actually good, or that you have been a little shit disturber or a troublemaker, or that there's all these things that that instead of trying making it all about going out and doing good deeds in the world, but rather to what Sunra says, just do nothing, right? Because this is and it's kind of funny because it also, there's this for me, there's something about, it's putting something about spirituality back in alignment with something that is maybe a bit more punk rock. Because I'm going to give an example. There's this guy that I was thinking, there's not very many celebrities or famous people that I've met in real life, but I met this guy, Mike, this guy who has the same last name as me, Mike Burkett, Fat Mike from NoFX. But this is just, I was with some girl who's getting his autograph at the Vans Warped Tour when I was a teenager, right? But I saw an interview with Fat Mike, and he was talking about this song that he did when one of his earlier bands that said, "A wasted life is not a crime," right? And he's saying, like, okay, if you're just a lazy person, or maybe, okay, he wasn't even saying lazy, like maybe if you just work some dead-end job and you don't do any, like, great, righteous good deed, but you just, but like, even if you were just you don't do anything remarkable with your life, is like that, like if you just live a quiet, peaceful life, and you're not under all this pressure, like you have to become Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or some sort of messianic savior who's going to right all the wrongs in the world, but just sort of chill out and maybe not try to act so toxic to the people around you, then it's like, maybe that is better than trying to be like feeling all this pressure, like I've got to be the hero that goes and slays the dragon, and then you end up wondering why you just turned into some psycho killer, right? Like me, and like my whole thing is like, maybe it's easier for me to go this direction because I don't really feel like I'm a very violent guy. I don't really maybe feel like I'm an ambitious guy. But like there's this thing about like self-acceptance, right? Which has to go with like individuality and like the healing in Aries, that like maybe healing maybe this whole thing isn't like, I'm going to heal the part of like whatever wounded part of me it's like my trauma is getting in the way from me being some sort of successful millionaire who's going to change the world and live this righteous life. That maybe my healing is like healing the wounded part of me that's not okay to just be a normal guy who isn't going to like be Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, or like so that I don't have to be some grandiose person. I can just be myself, a normal person with all these imperfections, with all these could be bad habits, that could be things that people might judge me for or whatever. But it's like by embracing those parts of ourselves, rather than trying to go into being a hero, that might be less crazy. That might help to put you away from these people. Like, I don't know. But I mean, this is the thing is like one of the reasons why I'm not doing things with spiritual emergency anymore is because I feel like it's going to be like, or the whole world about like spiritual entrepreneurship and life coaches and hustle culture. I love astrology, right? But I don't think that, just categorically, the art and practice of astrology doesn't have to be like, helping people become little Machiavellian, maniacs, everybody vying to like, for some sort of position of power or importance in the world, right? And like there's certain thing about like, I was also thinking like there's this thing that I remember this line from Star Trek, The Next Generation, Jean-Luc Picard. I can't remember specifically what episode this was or what was going on in the episode, but this line stayed with me, right? That Jean-Luc Picard was saying it's possible, like he was talking about some sort of like strategy or some sort of like, it was almost some sort of military thing or some sort of like, situation that they're engaging with. And he's saying that you have to consider that you could make no mistakes. You could do everything right and still lose. Right? And I think like this is what I want. This is the point that I'm trying to drive home with this eclipse, is that I feel like there's this underlying thing that people are like, the reason why I'm ill, the reason why I'm suffering is because there's some, like, I'm a sinner, right? There's something that's wrong with me, that if I just get myself right with this perfect ideal, and if I live, do every, like, this virtuosity, or, like, be scrupulosity, if I do everything right, then by putting myself in alignment and really just trying really hard to do the right thing all the time, that is going to be the thing that heals me, right? But if you look around, like the thing is, a lot of people just don't talk about their challenges, about their health problems. If you look around, there may be a lot of people who are, like, if I judge myself for the fact that I'm not a parent, that I don't have a proper career going, that I'm not living the same life as everybody else, I could talk to somebody who is a parent, who does have a good career, who is a productive member of society, who has corrected all the problems that I have, that I consider to be problems, and they could have the exact same illness that I do and be on the exact same medication for it. Or there could be people that, like, I have my own approach to life that is based on my own personality and my own individuality, but I could, I want to respect people's privacy. I'm not going to talk about the people that are in the clinic where I'm getting my medication, but I can tell that there's a big, vast, diverse range of different people who have to be on the same drug for the same problem. And I don't know all the details about, I can't really say anything about what are going on in their life, but I don't think that, there's certain friends of mine who are like, you'd be like, oh yeah, it's like, maybe, Dan, you're just sick because you have a problem with your chakra, because you're not living your life in alignment to this higher ideal and stuff like that. And it's like, well, maybe it's, I don't know. Like, there's some people that I've had to just avoid because there's also this whole thing that is like this premise that if you if you just put yourself, engage with society and correct whatever it is that isn't like engaging with society, then you're healed because you're like part of the common masses doing the thing that everybody else does. But there's some, like, it's almost a cliche now, the idea that there's no measure of health to be well adjusted to a sick society, right? And that you could do all the things that, like, you think, okay, I'm going to write all the things that I think are wrong about myself, I'm going to correct them. You could do that and then just be just as sick, if not more sick, right? Like, and there's also this whole thing about like spirituality and healing, and I'm just gonna like throw it out there that I think oftentimes it's probably part of a marketing gimmick that it's a way to sell tickets, it's a way to get people to buy your self-help books, but like at the end of the day, there are plenty of people who are enlightened masters who have health problems, who are not immune to the fact that you're in the body. The body itself is an imperfect thing. The human condition is an imperfect thing. And I think that's actually something that is, for me, we're in the Easter weekend. My family is, my mom will explicitly say that she just doesn't believe in Christianity, that she's not a follower of Jesus Christ. So it's like, for me, I'm probably not going to go Christian while I live with my family, because it would just be creating conflict with people who don't believe in that. But I do actually think that there's some merit in Christianity, because Christianity isn't telling people they need to, like, this whole thing about being a sinner is that, like, it's inevitable because that is just the way the world is, right? And it's like it's like what Sun Ra was saying is that the Christian path is actually maybe more in tune with the path of the wicked, because Jesus Christ, the fact that Sun Ra was saying that the fact that Jesus died for our sins, right? Being that if Jesus didn't die for our sins, it would mean that we would all have to go out and live extremely righteous lives, right? Because there'd be no savior that saved us from the problem of our own sinful nature, right? So to feel like you have to correct everything wrong about yourself and become this sort of, like, Ubermensch CEO, like the Christian path is more like the meek shall inherit the earth, which is like accepting the fact that you're not like some Superman, accepting the fact that you are an imperfect person, and you don't have to be the messianic hero savior of the world, right? Because that's Jesus did that, so you don't have to, right? I mean, but the thing is, like, there's all this thing in Christianity that you're not supposed to use that as an excuse to just keep sinning or anything like that, right? And there are issues of the corruption that creeps in if you become complacent with that, right? But the fact is that, like, there's this it could be this other path where, I mean, and I think that it goes with Aries, because Aries is very young, and it's very about being active and all this kind of stuff. But, like, to accept your imperfections is to accept your individuality, to accept your own personhood. And there's something about, like, I don't know, I don't know if I can really explain. It's something that happened in my, when I was having these altered states of psychosis way back in the day, right? That part of it was just had to do with feeling like the person that I was in the world was somehow my own. Like, it was just not okay to be myself, right? And this drives people to suicide and stuff like that. But the thing, there was something in, or I got over my own suicide, that problem or whatever, right? I got over that because there's something that made me realize that there's something absurd about not being able to accept yourself. Because it's like for me, it was, I'm kind of relating. I don't know if I should get into it, but there has to do with, like, there's all this stuff about, like, trans issues and homophobia and stuff like that. And the thing is, like, I am not, I am pretty much a straight guy, but I'm sort of, like, maybe have my own feminine qualities or things. Like, I was listening to a young trans person talk about, like, one of the reasons why they went trans was because they'd always felt very effeminate, and part of that was their, like, own body image because they were skinny, right? And one of the things that I kind of relate to this in that, like, there's a way that I'm a tall and skinny guy, and, like, there are all these kinds of guys, like, it's like, if you think about J.R.R. Tolkien, there may be people that resemble more like dwarves, and there may be people that resemble more like elves, right? And I took a 23andMe test, and I found that my tall skinniness is actually due to a gene, right? And so there may be all these guys who, like, look like little dwarf people that are, like, stocky guys who may be, like, construction workers, and, you may feel picked on because compared to these guys, you might be, like, wearing, like, skinny hipster jeans, and you have a different body type, and that you have a different there's something just about, it could just be genetics even, right? That there's this thing that you're like, for whatever reason, my genes or my whether it's a genetic determinism or it's just my personality, that I'm not the kind of guy who's probably going to be working in a construction yard. But to walk past a bunch of construction workers and they're going to, like, laugh at you or something for being, like, literally, my genes make my body this way. I'm just, like, this is the kind of thing about, like, how much choice do we have about the people that we are anyways? I don't think I don't think really, like, there's this idea that you can just use some sort of like masculine super ego willpower to just completely reject the person you are, to make yourself into this other person because you feel bullied by a bunch of people who are a bunch of jerks. Like, that's, like, honestly, I'm with, you know, there's all this stuff about people who don't like the woke crowd, but honestly, I'm more likely to go with the woke crowd because, like, fuck those talk that, like, what do you know? You're just gonna, like, laugh at me and pick on me because my genes make me a certain way that I have no control over, and I'm supposed to hate myself and reject myself because I'm a person that I just am who I am. And then and you're not gonna, you know, you can torture me and bully me and fucking, you know, you can burn all the fags all you want. They're still gonna be around. And I'm more on the side of the wokes, you know, so I'm sorry about it, you know. I'm just like, I don't want to, you know, well, there we go. Anyways, I don't know. I'm trying to be apolitical, but one of the things, like, there's all these people that are, I also, you know, I can see how there's principles and ideas which in practice may get out of hand. And I think part of the problem is the internet is kind of a little bit messed up. There may be, you know, and like, you know, I don't know. I'm not going to get onto the whole culture war around wokeism anyways, but there's something about basic self-acceptance. And that basic self-acceptance, like, I personally don't feel the need to transition or something like that. But if I accept myself that I don't, like, there's going to be some hyper masculine guy that judges you because you're not as hyper masculine as them. But what if that's literally just part of how you are built? This is like you know, there's some weird irony. Like, if all this queer stuff, you know, it was such an affront to God, then why did God make all these people gay in the first place, right? Or like, and even the stuff about, like, you know, not just transgender, but intersex, that there are people who are literally not one gender or the other. That there's gender reassignment surgery, which is like doing, rather than taking surgery to change your gender from one thing to another, there's surgery to make you conform to a gender when you don't, right? And I've met people that are intersex, right? And it's like the actual real world isn't the same as this ideal that we have of it, right? And for that reason, I'm, you know, it may actually be more like the existentialist said, that maybe existence precedes essence, not the other way around. But you can't, like I said in my earlier part of my video, that could be a way to do, you can still do astrology even if existence precedes essence. Okay, I don't know. Like I said, I have a lot of ideas for this right now, but I'm gonna end it there, and hopefully you guys like this. I'm just letting it rip today, basically. All right, thanks for supporting the channel. Hopefully you like it. I'll come back with more later. All right.